What happens when Hollywood royalty sits down for what should be a simple late-night interview, only to face a host who seems determined to tear down everything they've built? In just 36 seconds of television, Stephen Colbert managed to turn what began as a friendly chat with Sylvester Stallone into one of the most shocking meltdowns in late-night history. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really went down that night. This is one of those moments that shows just how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos clash on live television. The Late Show studio was buzzing with the usual pre-show energy. Sylvester Stallone, the legendary actor behind Rocky and Rambo, had agreed to come on the show to promote his latest project. At 77 years old, Stallone was still commanding respect in Hollywood, still working, still creating. He walked onto that stage with the confidence of a man who had spent decades earning his place in cinema history. Stephen Colbert greeted him with the kind of smile that late-night hosts perfect over years of practice. The audience applauded as Stallone took his seat, waving to the crowd with that familiar grin that had charmed moviegoers for generations. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed friendly. But something was different about Colbert that night. The interview started innocently enough. Colbert asked about Stallone's new film, and the actor launched into his usual passionate explanation of his craft. You could see the genuine excitement in Stallone's eyes as he talked about the character development, the stunts, the months of preparation that went into every role. "You know, Stephen," Stallone said, leaning forward in his chair, "people think action movies are just about the explosions and the fight scenes, but there's real heart in these stories. There's real emotion." Colbert nodded along, but there was something cold in his expression, something calculating. The audience couldn't see it yet, but Stallone was starting to pick up on the shift in energy. The way Colbert's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he seemed to be waiting for something. "That's interesting," Colbert replied, his voice carrying just a hint of condescension. "Real emotion in action movies. Tell me, Sly, do you ever worry that maybe you've been playing the same character for, 40 years? The question hit like a slap. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful ribbing that late-night shows were known for. This felt personal. This felt mean. Stallone's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. He was a professional, after all. He'd been doing interviews longer than most people in that studio had been alive. "Well, Stephen, I think every actor brings something personal to their roles," Stallone said carefully. "Rocky, Rambo, they might seem similar on the surface, but they come from different places emotionally." But Colbert wasn't done. If anything, he seemed emboldened by Stallone's diplomatic response. He leaned back in his chair with the kind of smug satisfaction that made viewers at home cringe. "Different places emotionally," Colbert repeated, drawing out each word like he was savoring them. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found a formula that worked and just kept cashing those checks." The studio went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. This wasn't comedy anymore. This wasn't entertainment. This was a host using his platform to humiliate a guest, and everyone in that room could feel it. Stallone's jaw tightened. His hands, those famous hands that had thrown countless punches on screen, gripped the arms of his chair. But still, he tried to keep things professional. "Stephen, I've been blessed to work in this industry for a long time," he said, his voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Every role I take, I give everything I have. That's what the audience deserves." Colbert waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "Oh, come on, Sly. The audience? Or is it the paycheck? Because let's be honest here. When's the last time you actually challenged yourself as an actor? When's the last time you did something that wasn't just Stallone being Stallone?" The attack was so blatant, so unnecessary, that even the Late Show band members were looking at each other with confusion. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how these interviews were supposed to go. Guests came on to promote their projects, share a few laughs, and leave everyone feeling good. They didn't come on to be torn apart by a host who seemed to have some kind of personal vendetta. Stallone took a deep breath. You could see him making a choice in that moment. He could laugh it off, make a joke, try to salvage the interview, or he could stand up for himself. At 77 years old, having given his whole life to entertaining people, having inspired millions with his characters, he wasn't about to sit there and let some talk show host diminish everything he'd accomplished. "You know what, Stephen?" Stallone said, and his voice had changed completely. The diplomatic tone was gone. Now there was steel in his words, the kind of strength that had made Rocky Balboa a cultural icon. "I think you've got me confused with someone who needs your approval." The audience stirred. This was getting real. This was getting uncomfortable, but they couldn't look away. Nobody could look away. Colbert's eyebrows shot up, like he couldn't believe someone was actually pushing back against his attack. He'd clearly expected Stallone to just take it, to laugh along with the humiliation like so many other guests probably did. But Stallone wasn't most guests. Stallone was a fighter, both on-screen and off. "Oh, did I strike a nerve?" Colbert asked, and there was genuine surprise in his voice, mixed with what sounded like delight. He was enjoying this. He was actually enjoying watching one of Hollywood's most beloved figures squirm under his questioning. "No, Steven, you struck something else," Stallone replied. And now he was sitting up straighter, his shoulders squared. "You struck the truth. You're sitting there acting like some kind of authority on what makes good entertainment, but what have you ever created? What have you ever built that meant something to people?" The question hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Colbert's confident smirk wavered for just a second, but that second was enough. Everyone in the studio saw it. The moment when the predator realized he might have picked the wrong prey. "Excuse me?" Colbert said, trying to regain his composure, but his voice cracked slightly on the second word. "I think I've built quite a successful career in comedy and television. Thank you very much." Stallone leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since this disaster started, he looked completely relaxed, like he'd just found his footing in a fight he didn't ask for but was ready to finish. "Comedy?" Stallone repeated, and there was something dangerous in his tone. "Is that what this is? Because I've got to tell you, Steven, I'm not laughing, and neither is your audience." The camera caught several audience members nodding their heads. Others looked down at their hands, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. This wasn't the Stephen Colbert they knew. This wasn't the host who usually made them feel good about spending their evening in his studio. Colbert's face was starting to flush red. You could see him struggling to maintain control of his own show. He looked down at his note cards, then back up at Stallone, like he was trying to figure out how to get back to the script. "Look, Sly," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the silence of the studio. "Maybe we should talk about your new movie. Isn't that why you're here?" But Stallone wasn't ready to let this go. Not after what Colbert had put him through. Not after being disrespected on national television by someone who had never walked a day in his shoes. "No, Steven, let's keep talking about what you brought up," Stallone said, his voice steady and controlled. "You want to question my career choices? Let's question yours. Tell me, when's the last time you took a real risk? When's the last time you put yourself out there and actually created something, instead of just sitting behind that desk tearing down people who do?" The studio was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Even the production crew had stopped moving around. Everyone was frozen, watching this train wreck happen in real time. Colbert tried to laugh it off again, but it came out more like a nervous cough. "I'm a talk show host, Sly. My job is to ask the tough questions." "Tough questions?" Stallone shot back, and now his voice was rising. "Or cheap shots? Because there's a difference, Steven. A tough question would be asking me about my process, about what drives me to keep working at my age. A cheap shot is what you've been doing for the last 10 minutes. The audience started to murmur among themselves. Some were nodding in agreement. Others looked shocked that things had gotten this heated. But all of them were riveted. This was live television at its most raw and unpredictable. Colbert was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. His producers were probably screaming in his earpiece, telling him to cut to commercial, to end the segment, to do something to stop this from getting worse. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Well, maybe if you gave more interesting answers," Colbert said, and the pettiness in his voice was unmistakable now. "We wouldn't need to dig so deep." That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment Stallone decided he'd had enough. His face went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone in the studio had to lean forward to hear him. "Interesting answers," he repeated slowly. "You know what's interesting, Steven? I've spent 50 years in this business. I wrote Rocky when I was broke, when nobody believed in me, when I was sleeping in bus stations because I couldn't afford rent. I sold my dog because I needed money for food. And when they finally wanted to make the movie, they offered me $300,000 to sell the script, but only if I agreed not to star in it." The studio was completely silent now. Even Colbert seemed to be listening despite himself. "You know what I did?" Stallone continued, his voice getting stronger with every word. "I said no. I turned down $300,000 because I believed in something. Because I knew that Rocky wasn't just a character, he was a part of me, and I was willing to risk everything I had, to make sure that story got told the right way." Colbert opened his mouth to say something, but Stallone held up his hand. "I'm not done," Stallone said firmly. That movie made over $100 million. It won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. But more than that, it meant something to people. It inspired people. I get letters every day from people telling me that Rocky helped them through cancer, through divorce, through losing their jobs. That character gave them hope when they didn't have any left. The emotion in Stallone's voice was real and raw. This wasn't an act. This wasn't a performance. This was a man defending his life's work against someone who had never put anything meaningful on the line. And you want to sit there? Stallone continued, pointing directly at Colbert, in your comfortable chair with your guaranteed paycheck, and tell me that what I do doesn't matter, that it's just about cashing checks? You want to mock the thing that's given meaning to my life and hope to millions of other people? Colbert looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. The confident, smug host from 10 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who clearly realized he'd made a terrible mistake but didn't know how to fix it. Sly, I didn't mean to, he started to say, but Stallone cut him off. Yes, you did, Stallone said simply. You absolutely meant to. You came into this interview with an agenda. You wanted to tear me down on your show to make yourself look clever. Well, congratulations, Stephen. Mission accomplished. You got your viral moment. But Colbert, instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of human decency, doubled down on his attack. Maybe it was panic. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was just the realization that he'd already crossed the line and figured he might as well keep going. Oh, come on, Sly, Colbert said, and his voice was getting higher, more desperate. Don't play the victim here. You're a millionaire many times over. You've had an incredible run. But let's not pretend that Rocky 7 or Rambo 12 or whatever rehash you're pushing now is some kind of artistic masterpiece. The gasp from the audience was audible. Even for Colbert, this was too far. This was beyond disrespectful. This was cruel. Stallone went very still. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. What did you just say? Colbert seemed to realize he'd just stepped off a cliff, but it was too late to take it back. The words were out there. The damage was done. I said, Colbert repeated, and you could hear the tremor in his voice now. Let's not pretend your latest movie is high art. High art, Stallone repeated slowly, like he was tasting something bitter. You know what, Stephen? You're right. It's not high art. It's something better than that. It's honest. It's real. It comes from the heart. And that scares you, doesn't it? Colbert tried to interrupt, but Stallone was just getting started. It scares you because you've never put anything honest out into the world. You've never risked anything. You've never created a character that people love, that people connect with, that people see themselves in. All you do is sit behind that desk and make jokes about other people's work. The studio was completely silent, except for Stallone's voice. Even the band had stopped playing their little musical stings. Everyone was frozen. You want to know what my latest movie is about? Stallone continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. It's about an old man who refuses to give up. It's about someone who's been knocked down so many times that most people would stay down, but he keeps getting back up. It's about fighting for what matters, even when the whole world is telling you you're too old, you're too tired, you're too broken. Colbert opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Sound familiar, Stephen? Stallone asked, and there was fire in his eyes now. Because that's exactly what I'm doing right here, right now. I'm an old man who's been knocked down by some talk show host who thinks he's clever, and I'm getting back up, just like Rocky, just like Rambo, just like every character I've ever played. The audience started to applaud, slowly at first, then building. These weren't polite television applause. These were real people responding to real emotion. They were on Stallone's side now, completely and totally. Colbert looked around desperately, like he was hoping someone would save him from the hole he dug for himself. His producers were probably screaming in his ear to end this, to cut to commercial, to do anything to stop the bleeding. But Stallone wasn't finished. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? Stallone said, standing up from his chair. You had a chance tonight to have a real conversation with someone who's lived an incredible life. Someone who could have shared stories that would have inspired your audience, made them laugh, made them feel something. Instead, you chose to be small. You chose to be petty. You chose to try to tear down someone who's given everything to entertain people. Colbert was visibly sweating now. His makeup was starting to run under the hot studio lights, and his hands were shaking as he shuffled through his note cards, like they might contain some magic words that could fix this disaster. Sly, please, let's just... he started to say, but Stallone held up his hand. "No, Steven, I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with your show. And I'm done pretending that what you did here tonight was acceptable." The audience was on their feet now, applauding loudly. Some were even whistling and cheering. They'd witnessed something unprecedented. They'd seen a Hollywood legend defend his honor against a bully who had picked the wrong fight. Stallone started to walk toward the edge of the stage, but then he turned back to face Colbert one more time. "You know what's really sad about all this?" he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent studio. "I came here tonight because I respect this show. I respect what late-night television can be when it's done right, when it brings people together instead of tearing them apart, when it celebrates the things that make us human instead of mocking them." Colbert looked like he might actually cry. The man who had started this interview so confident, so ready to humiliate his guest, now looked broken and small behind his big desk. "I've been doing this for 50 years, Stallone continued. "I've sat through thousands of interviews. Some hosts ask tough questions, and that's fine. That's part of the job. But the good ones, the ones who really understand what they're doing, they ask tough questions with respect. They challenge their guests because they want to bring out something interesting, something meaningful. They don't attack their guests just to make themselves feel important." The silence in the studio was deafening. You could hear people in the audience crying. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a masterclass in dignity, in standing up for yourself, in refusing to be diminished by someone who should have known better. "I hope you learned something tonight, Steven," Stallone said, his voice softer now but still carrying that unbreakable strength. "I hope you learned that there's a difference between being clever and being cruel. There's a difference between asking tough questions and launching personal attacks. And there's a difference between being a talk show host and being a bully." With that, Sylvester Stallone walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio full of stunned people and one talk show host who had just experienced the most humiliating moment of his career. The cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, catching Colbert's face as he sat there in complete defeat, before finally cutting to commercial. It was over. The most shocking, most uncomfortable, most devastating interview in late-night television history was finally over. But the impact would last much longer than those 36 seconds it started at all.